Let's welcome back to MidPoint from the Philadelphia law firm of O'Brien and Ryan, LLP. Our legal eagle, Heather Hansen, joins us. Heather, let's get down now to other lawsuits out of what's happened in Ferguson here, because everybody is now talking about the Justice Department getting involved and a civil rights lawsuit. Do you see anything here indicated in this evidence that we have that would indicate any basis for a civil rights lawsuit?
No, Ed, the standard for a civil rights lawsuit is so much higher. There has to be proof of an intentional violation. Against Officer Wilson, it would have to be proof of an intentional violation of Brown's constitutional rights. That standard is so much higher. You know, we saw with the Zimmerman case, there was talk of a federal lawsuit, and that still has not been closed. I think the same thing will happen here. I think that there will be a long delay, perhaps in the hopes that tempers will die down, and then a decision as to whether or not this will actually go forward. It would be very difficult to bring a case against Wilson. Maybe a little less so to bring a case against the Ferguson Police Department. They would have to establish that there has been a practice of behaviors that infringe upon people's constitutional rights. But it was interesting in the transcripts, they asked the jurors, the grand jurors asked one of the police officers, have you had an officer involved shooting, not killing, just shooting in the past 10 years. And it's only been one or two. So that in and of itself is an interesting piece of evidence. But that's what the DOJ is examining, not just Wilson, but the entire police department. Is there something here that we can go after and change?
What about the possibility of a civil suit by the Brown family against the officer?
It's going to be very difficult. First of all, there's the question of immunity. Police officers acting within their course of their duties have qualified immunity for the most part. Secondly, it is really, you know, a civil lawsuit is not beyond a reasonable doubt. That is not the standard. The standard is a preponderance of the evidence, which really means, is it more likely than not that Officer Wilson is liable? That's a similar standard to what the grand jury had here. So sure, I believe the family will probably try to pursue such a thing, but if Officer Wilson decides to defend it rather than to settle it and move on with his life, I think he would win that as well. Listen, the evidence is very, very telling. The physical evidence supports Officer Wilson's version of the facts. It does not support, for example, the friend, that Dorian Johnson, his version of the facts. It's just not consistent with the physical evidence that just doesn't lie.
To that end, is possibly one of the most distressing things here from a legal standpoint is how the various media outlets have continued to characterize this and how they are leaving out facts in the case. For instance, I don't think, except on this show, I don't think we have heard again about the fact that Michael Brown was involved in an alleged strong-arm robbery that started this whole thing in motion.
Well, and it's one of the things, it's so frustrating, to answer your question, because all these people who are commenting on it, including, in my opinion, some of the lawyers who represent some of the parties, haven't read the whole transcript. It is boring in parts, but it is fascinating in other parts. And the jurors were very interested in that robbery. The jurors were very interested. They were asking the friend who was with Michael Brown, why didn't you walk on the sidewalk? And when the officer asked you to move to the sidewalk, why didn't you just go? Those were questions from the jurors. Those weren't questions from the prosecutors. The jurors were very thoughtful with what they said. So to hear people on media just taking sentences and not respecting these jurors in the process is very frustrating.
We never hear the word alleged anymore when it comes down to opining on a lot of these things, do we?
No. And it's, you know, if I can read you just one sentence from one of the jurors who was there.
Got about 20 seconds. Go ahead.
He said, people keep saying, why don't they just arrest him and then figure out what's going on? Is there a way to bypass this? Because it seems to me that we're doing what needs to be done and we're doing what's right, and people aren't seeing that. That's a juror speaking, and I think that's best said.
And that is indeed best said, because we're going to be talking about this for a while and tearing this all apart. But it's always fascinating. As I say, I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on TV, and that's why I let you do it on TV on a regular basis. Heather Hansen, pleasure to have you on the show again. Thanks for making the trip today. Please, a very happy Thanksgiving to you and your family.
You too, Ed. Take care.
You too. We'll see you next week. Next hour here on MidPoint, the politician who promises he will do everything in his power to defang Obamacare. Body language from Ferguson. And a very special appetizer for your Thanksgiving holiday. It's coming up right here on MidPoint.